Now that we have an understanding of the basics of sketching in Shapr3D, here we will learn more about some sketching options, including using auto-constraints, snap to grid, and guides. So first, let's start by tapping on the sketch here. And notice in my top corner here, I have two options of auto-constraint and show constraints. So let's go ahead and make sure both of these are currently on. And now, since auto constraint is turned on, if I were to just draw a vertical line, let's say here, notice this vertical line is in fact coming in vertical, and I also have an icon here. This icon is indicating I have a constraint, and in this case, a vertical constraint. So what that means is that essentially this line is constrained to be vertical. So if I wanted to make some change, try to move this endpoint around, for example, no matter how I move this, notice my line is staying a vertical line because it has been constrained to be a vertical line. Now similarly, if I were to turn auto constraint off, as we might expect, now if I were to draw a vertical line, again, this line has come in vertical because I drew it vertical, but notice I'm no longer seeing that vertical constraint icon on this line. Thus, it has not been automatically constrained to be a vertical line. And now, if I were to try to make any change, move this endpoint around, for example, notice I can change this to no longer be a vertical line, but some angled line, horizontal line, whatever it might be. Thus, we can see by having our auto constraint turned on, Shapr3D will do its best to automatically throw in your sketching constraints. Now, of course, this is going to be a user preference. Sometimes you might want this turned on, sometimes you might want this turned off, and so on. And it's going to depend on your own user preferences as well as the specific requirements or needs for your designs. Of course, having auto constraint turned on can be a very useful option, as it will save you a ton of time because you won't have to manually throw in every constraint. However, in some cases, maybe you want to make edits or changes after the fact, so in that case, maybe you don't want constraints to automatically come in while sketching. A few more very useful sketching options or settings we have are down in the bottom right corner here on this magnet icon. Here we can turn on or off our snap to grid and our guides as we may need. So let's first take a look at snap to grid, and as the name suggests, this forces your sketches to snap to a specific grid point. So let's make sure this is turned on to start with. And if I were to draw a line here, notice it's snapping to my exact grid points here. So as we can see, this can be quite useful as it helps keep my sketches quite organized and guided, and will also give more exact dimensions. However, of course, if we'd like to turn this off, I can just turn snap to grid off, and now when I sketch my line, notice I can sketch my line essentially anywhere, any length, whatever it might be, and I no longer am snapping to my specific grid points. Let's now take a look at using our guides or guidelines. So again, let's make sure our guides are turned on here. And guides, as the name suggests, are used to help guide my sketches. So, for example, perhaps I want to move this endpoint, and notice right away I'm seeing these purple lines come in, and those are my purple guidelines. So this is helping to guide me. Perhaps I want to move it horizontally or vertically, and we have these guidelines coming in. Similarly, I find guidelines or guide points on any existing entities. So for example, if I were to move this point over another line's endpoint, I now see a guide point of this endpoint coming in. Or I could put it anywhere on my specific edge. I also have a midpoint guide, so it really just helps guide my sketches. Another very useful aspect to my guides here are maybe I want to draw another line here, and let's say I don't want to go necessarily directly on a line, but I want to go on the extension of that line. Notice I'm trying to hover around here finding the extension of my second line there. I'm not really finding it automatically, but what I can do is I can wake this up. So if I just hover over anywhere on the existing line and now continue on, now I notice I have a guideline for the extension of that existing line. Now to really see the power of my guides, let's draw a very simple sketch. In this case, I'm just going to sketch out a rectangle, for example. So I'll start just by drawing a vertical line, automatically seeing my guideline come in, keeping this line vertical. And as soon as I hit the x-axis, I have a guide point coming in telling me I've hit this x-axis. Similarly, now I'll draw my horizontal line. Again, it's telling me I have a guide point on my x-axis, and I'm following this horizontal guide line. Same idea, I'll draw my next vertical line here. Again, showing me my vertical guideline here. Now it can be very useful here. Now notice I've hit another guideline showing me that I've hit the midpoint of my first line. Or I can continue on and go all the way to the end point or start point of my initial line, and seeing guides all the way through this sketch. Finally, same exact idea with my final horizontal line. I have a guideline coming in, keeping this line horizontal. I can hit the midpoint and see a guideline come in there as well, or continue on until I hit my end point and have some more guidelines and a guide point. Thus we can see I can use my guides to really help guide my sketches. Another very useful option I have is once I have a completed sketch, such as this, a closed sketch, or even a closed face, I can also now draw some line, let's say, and go to the sketch center or face center, essentially the center point of a specific sketch or existing face. I can also extend from there in any direction and get guidelines from there. Maybe I want to go all the way up to this midpoint guide, for example. So we see guides are really just useful to help guide my sketches and make my sketching even faster and more accurate.